And now we are joined by Ambassador Anil Kumar Trigunayat. He's the former senior diplomat joining us from National Capital to talk about the big takeaways as far as the points put forth by the India's External Affairs Minister at the recently concluded Raisina Dialogue is concerned. Sir, good evening and thank you very much for joining us. From reforms in the UN reforms, India leading that conversation, to its position on China and Russia. Overall, as in your understanding, what's the larger message that India has tried to, or the narrative that India has tried to set through this platform?
Well, I think that, Sakal, that this Raisina Dialogue, which has now moved into the 10th edition, this was the 9th edition that got completed. And during this, one has seen that the theme was Chaturanga. And Chaturanga was essentially looking at the conflict, the contest and cooperation and creation. Now, those are the basic 4 themes that they were trying to discuss across 5 or 6 themes. So that was there. And it has become a flagship event for India to project its ideas and which way the Indian foreign policy is moving, how India's foreign policy is trying to achieve those dimensions, what are the new challenges and what are India's solutions to these challenges. And I think that this is something that has been very clearly conveyed. And when we had the representatives of about 117 countries, over 3,000 people, different ministers and all, so one can see that there is a loud and clear message. Number 1, that India has arrived on the global stage. Number 2, the world hears India. Number 3, India deserves and wants to claim its rightful place in the multilateral organizations, especially the United Nations Security Council. After holding the G20 very successfully, which everybody has admitted and congratulated India for, I think that the world today knows that the largest democracy is ready to play a much bigger role on the global scheme of things. And that's where the discussion with regard to various conflict zones came up, with regard to the multilateral institutions and where they stand. And that's precisely what I think Dr. Jaishankar in the end says. It captures what we have achieved, but more importantly, indicate the promises ahead. So I think that this is a good discussion. Most importantly, I mean, I would say the message was loud and clear that India is committed to carry on with the IMEC corridor, India, Europe, Middle East corridor, which was signed on the sidelines of the G20. And the visit and the presence of the Greek Prime Minister, which was the end point actually, Piraeus was here, and we have strategic partners, historic civilizational partners, and the clear message that despite whatever is going on around in the world at the moment, India continues to remain committed to connectivity through various corridors.
Yes, since you mentioned about the Greek Prime Minister, he very vehemently backed India's candidature at the UNSC, where he said that India should represent at the highest table. And not only him, I mean, if you could just share your thoughts on the fact that the representatives and the state heads from various global south nations or otherwise the diplomats or officials, that they're giving that important space to India to lead such conversation. Though here the forum that all of them spoke was Raisina Dialogue, but do you think now this has actually set the tone of the larger discourse when it comes for actually telling UN that now it's time to move on?
Well, I think that India has been saying it for far too long, and so is the world. But as you know, the biggest problem of the United Nations is its basic governance model that is driven by the P5 countries. And these permanent 5, which wield the veto, are not letting things move on. I mean, that is one of the problems, apart from the fact that they don't reflect the reality of the 21st century. They are having a mindset of the victor and the vanquished that existed in the 1945, and that has not grown out of it. And therefore, their relevance has been reduced. And you know that the international governance architecture today, especially the United Nations, are under a tremendous criticism for this inability to do so. But I mean, basically, you can't accuse so much because at the end of the day, it is the basic pattern and the framework of the United Nations that was built to serve certain ends. It remains there. So India is very much there. Overtly, all countries admit that India must be there. Of course, China is an exception to the rule. But at the same time, we'll have to see how it plays out. Of course,
But
India
Minister
has emerged
Jaishankar also
as
points out,
voice of the
sir,
global south.
yes, he also points out,
So,
since you're talking about UN, that UN is a reflection of a colonial leader. I think that's a very bold statement. I mean, it's calling spade a spade.
well, that is true. I mean, what is happening today, you have seen it, that defiance has become the order of the day rather than compliance with the international order or international rule-based system that was governing the countries. And we have seen, and that is very clearly evident during the ongoing conflicts which are there. Nobody is listening to anybody. And that's the problem. And you are seeing the mayhem that is being caused. So sane voices are falling on deaf ears. I mean, that is something, and United Nations is supposed to provide stability and security and look after that. And that's what it is failing in that. And Prime Minister Modi has often said it, that if it does not rise to the occasion, then obviously it loses its relevance. So India is today not demanding. India is commanding its place in the Security Council. I mean, that's what it is. And if it does not reform or it is not reformed, and I hope that this year later, we are going to have a UN, a major summit is coming up in which there is a greater focus on making it more modern and more basically useful to today's world. And hopefully that the world will get up and listen to the voices and listen to the reality and comply with it.
You know, on that point, when he said that the mind games would be played and you cannot have reforms without consensus.
Well, this is the reforms cannot happen. I mean, this is my view personally, is that the P5 countries have not been very keen on sharing that the pride of place that seem to enjoy with any other country. And that's precisely the reason that it has not moved now in 15, 20 years, that the reforms have been on the table. And there are a group of L69. And in fact, the problem is that if you do not reform, if you do not grow, you do not adapt to the realities of this, then you lose relevance completely. Now, then it is said to be a talk show, and this talk show works nowhere. I mean, in India, I think that what India has shown in the G20, and what External Affairs Minister says that if G20 can expand, so can the United Nations. And of course, they can expand. But then what kind of expansion it should be? Who is going to share the responsibility? The problem is that, in my view, the root cause of all evil in the United Nations Security Council is the P5 veto power.
Yes, sir. So one final word from you now. India emerging as a strong power, that's fine, but also a nation which can actually bridge the divide, play the role of a bridge, and considering its relationships with the East, with the West, and the rest of the world. To your mind, the way today's session also concluded, and I'm sure you followed up on the other leaders also, so how do you see India's role, especially bridging the divide as far as there's a gap between global North and global South? There's a big gap.
Well, I think that India perceives, yeah, you're right, Sakal. I mean, India does perceive itself and has shown it. Firstly, you see India's policy in the international discourse is that of, for example, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, what is one family? And the G20 motto was that. And it was not simply a statement. It was something that India had done before that and has always done. That's been the DNA. So that has been greatly acceptable and appreciated by most countries in the world. And therefore, the global South has thought that India is the voice, it's a benign power, and which is, of course, by all counts, it has become a major power today, which is reckoned with. And therefore, India's views count on the global stage. And we have seen this all through. Every single leader who came here was praising India, including the Prime Minister of Greece, what he says about India's even democracy, for that matter. And India's growth story is remarkable in these adverse times.
Right, sir.
And India's role as a bridge builder between East and West and North and South has been acknowledged.
Right, so we'll leave it there. Many thanks, Ambassador Trigunayat. Always a pleasure,
Thank
sir,
you.
talking to you. Thank you for joining us.